Okay, thank you, Tomo. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to participate today. As Tomo says, I have a background in the swim from the ATM RPP involvement back to 2010, 2011. More and more now we're seeing a greater awareness and a greater uptake of swim and understanding of the swim concept and the capabilities. It was a bit slow moving at first, but in recent years, in the last 1 or 2 years, we've seen an acceleration, which is great. What we'll hear about today is some of the more advanced concepts that build out of swim, the trajectory-based operations and FFICE, which start to introduce more advancements in the concepts than just the basic underlying connectivity that the swim capability brings. And this is about then operationalising the better sharing of information to the best effect to get best benefits for stakeholders. So to do that as stakeholders, we need to ensure that these concepts grow uniformly and homogenously and that people move at the same time. We don't want to live in a mixed environment for as long as we need to, or any longer than we need to. We're acutely aware of some global concepts we've seen in the past that have taken decades, historically struggled because there have been early adopters that have done it well and other regions that haven't done anything in the time at all. And I think user preferred routes is a good example of that, where there's a lot of unrealised benefits globally. We need to get lessons or take lessons learned from those that are early adopters, and you'll hear from a few of them today. There'll be examples of how things were put in place, how they were changed and amended. Plus, we need to continue doing collaborative trials like this swim and ASEAN demonstration that concluded 2 weeks ago in Bangkok and Singapore and involved numerous states in the ASEAN group and in the non-ASEAN group. And you'll hear about that from Amo from Aerotai as well. But we need to do these trials and monitor those that are already progressing the swim and the new capabilities and concepts to help us identify the best applications of these concepts and the potential benefits for all stakeholders, and in particular the ANSPs and the airspace users working together, and also the airports as another stakeholder in that value chain. This sort of work also helps us to identify what doesn't work or where it doesn't meet a cost-benefit analysis, because we don't want to do change for change's sake if we don't need to. At the end of the day, we want to see a consistent and timely regional implementation that builds a successful global outcome. So first up today, we'd like to hear from Kim Breivik from Eurocontrol. Kim is the Chairman and Project Manager of Flight Plan and Flight Data Evolutions in Eurocontrol, and has done a lot of work in development of information flight planning systems and flight management systems and procedures over there. Kim led the Flight Plan 2012 change for Eurocontrol back then, and he's been a very active participant on the ATM requirements and performance panel dealing with these concepts as well for many years. Kim's background's in air traffic control in Ireland and in Maastricht, so he has a good knowledge of both the operational side and the systems side. So thanks, Kim. We look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about the what we're doing in Europe in terms of the implementation, FFICE implementation, and so on in Eurocontrol and the Network Manager. And I'll talk on basically I'll talk about the current environment and then the actual FFICE implementation status. The reason I talk about the current environment is simply because it'll help you to understand what we're doing in terms of implementation if you have a good overview or a good idea about how things work today. So the Network Manager, and primarily the flight planning system, the IFPS, essentially provides this an interface today with the flight plan originators, with the aircraft operators, and so on. So this is something that has been going on for a long time, of course. So providing feedback to a flight plan, a response message, negotiating quite often verbally with the aircraft operators if there's a particular problem that needs to be solved and so on. This has been sort of our bread and butter sort of operation for many years. So that's on the aircraft operator side, and on the ANSP side, IFPS is essentially acting as a sort of a front-end processor for European ANSP. So the IFPS system does all the validation and processing and so on for the flight plans on behalf of the European ANSP. So we have the complete database of all, you know, all restrictions and constraints and so on that are applicable to the flight. So we do all of that processing on behalf of the ANSPs and have a sort of single point contact for the aircraft operators in terms of flight planning and so on. We also, of course, have the flow management system, the ETFMS system, which provides the overall sort of demand capacity balancing function for Europe. Of course, there are local flow management positions which sort of perform a lot of, I suppose you could call it sort of fine tuning of flow management processes and procedures and so on, and coordination with the network manager. But in terms of overall traffic prediction, traffic load and so on, we provide all of that, and these local FMPs have access to the systems and so on. So it's a sort of a centralized system in that sense. We're using primarily AFDN, SIDMA, and AMHS, that sort of family, and of course more recently, well, recently for quite a few years already, what we call our B2B web services. For that, you can more or less just read SWIM services. And we're supporting, in addition to the ICAO 2012 flight plan, we also have what we call the ADXP, or ATS Data Exchange Protocol, which is a very structured format for flight planning that we've been using for a great many years. And of course, the web services, where we're using a sort of proprietary XML that we've developed some time ago. So in terms of those web services, here's just an overview of the services that are available via our, as I said, you can think of them as SWIM services, I suppose. You see them divided into flight, flow, airspace, and so on. And what's interesting, if I circle there the flight preparation services, validate a flight plan and so on, it's pretty much equivalent to what in FFICE is called the trial service. The flight filing, new flight plan, update, cancellation, and so on is pretty much analogous to the filing service. All the various query functions that are available, and again, pretty much equivalent to the flight data query service. Flight departure, we're not so interested in arrival, but the departure is there. That's part of, or again, analogous to the notification service. And down on the bottom right-hand side, we have the publish subscribe, where we publish flight plans, flight data, filing results, and this sort of stuff, which is available as part of the whole publish subscribe type of mechanism. So these are all things that are up and running, as I say, using primarily our own proprietary XML and so on. And as you see, there's a lot of all the other airspace and flow management and all that sort of stuff is also available. While I'm there, I just give a couple of slides just to give an idea of the scale, if you like. So here you see some figures that date from October this year. So on the publish subscribe side, we're around about 290 million publish subscribe transactions in October, about 83 million query reply type of functions. What's interesting to see down the bottom here is that the vast majority of these activities are related to flight management and flight preparation, flight planning, and so on. You see just an overview of the geographical the users of the system and so on. Okay, so moving into the real implementation. So we have been implementing the filing service, FFICE filing service, over the last couple of years. And this year and next year, we have the implementation at the moment using FFICE 4.1 and what I've called here a hybrid FFICE and current B2B service layer description. So the backend system, or the system itself, is supporting FFICE 4.1. As it says here, when it comes to the service layer description, it looks pretty much like the services that I just showed you there, available via B2B today. So that's there. It's available. It's on our ops platform, but is being used purely within a sort of a pre-ops context. And provides those services that we just had a look at but in the FFICE context, and as I say, using FFICE 4.1. We plan to make the migration to FFICE 4.2 and all that entails, which primarily the biggest impact there will be again at this sort of service layer description, where we'll no longer sort of look quite so much as like the current B2B implementation, but start looking a bit more like an FFICE implementation in terms of the service layer description. And then beyond that, from 21 onwards, we start implementing the planning service. So current activities, as I said, that the filing service is there today with the ability to submit an EFPL. It's on the pre-ops system, and we have some early testing activities taking place primarily with the one sort of major CFSP, if I can call it that, in Europe. So in the last few months, they've been busy with implementing FFICE and being able to send us EFPL. So we receive, process, we send the response and so on via the B2B interface. And we do the normal processing. Trajectory data validation, of course, is a major aspect of all this. This is what it all comes down to: receiving and processing trajectory information, which is far from trivial to do that. And what they're doing is to provide us with a parallel, or planning to do is to provide to our pre-op system a parallel provision of the EFPL, which at the same time, the actual operational FPL is sent to the op system, and in parallel, the EFPL is sent to our pre-op system. On the other side, we have ANSPs, and there's just one ANSP for the moment who is very interested in analyzing the impact of the mixed mode and translation activity and so on. So in terms of validity and predictability, so what they're doing is to capture the FPL that NM provides them, which results from that EFPL that we have received. So in other words, we're receiving the EFPL with the 4D trajectory and so on, and the real interest is to see whether the fact that we have a 4D trajectory, what impact that has on the FPL that results as an output. They, of course, will not receive, for the time being at least, will not receive the trajectory information. So there's an interest there to see what, if any, might be the impact of the processing as a result. In doing this sort of testing activity, it's early days. This has really just only started in the last couple of months or so. But we are creating we need to learn from this sort of activity, and we'll create what I've called here an acceptance criteria for successful testing. So before anybody can actually start providing EFPLs to the operational system, as opposed to pre-ops, before they can go onto the operational system, we need to be sure that we've achieved a certain level of quality and so on. So there'll be some criteria we need to clarify what exactly this looks like exactly in order to be able to go through into operations. And we're creating an issue tracking tool, which is a sort of an online repository of information, issues, and so on that we come across, which in its current form, it's very early days, but in its current form, it's primarily just for sharing between us and the CFSP that's doing the testing. But in time, if there are issues there which are more generic of interest to others, then we'll make either that tool or some part of that tool. Those issues will make visible to others. And I think that's about it in terms of the overview of where we are at the moment in the development.
Okay, thanks, Kim. We'll take questions after we hear from all the presenters. So I'll remind everyone to please add any questions you may have into the comment section of the webinar software as we go along, and we'll pick up what we can at the end, time permitting. We'd now like to turn to Ray Orberg from the FAA. Ray works for the FAA Air Traffic Organisation Mission Support Services. He's also an advisor for the FAA to the ICAO ATM Requirements and Performance Panel. He, again, has a background in air traffic control systems development and support, so understands the crossover between ops and the systems. Over to you, Ray. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My presentation will be slightly different flavor than Kim's. It's going to be a little more strategic, I would call it. We're going to cover SWIM, FFICE, and TBO, and talk a little bit about where we are with SWIM today at the FAA, and how we plan to use it to support FFICE. Then talk a little bit about our FFICE plan, and finally, some information on our TBO evolution and sort of what the steps we see going through and how our existing programs, there are many things already going on, and how that sort of matches up with this TBO concept and vision. And then finally, there's a little bit at the end. Toma wanted to know about what collaborations we have going on. I'll just inform you of some of the things that are happening there. So the first thing, FAA and SWIM, basically we've bought into SWIM, or implementing SWIM, and evolving, I would say, to use SWIM for eventually all our external data exchanges. What we see is that is the means by which data sharing will occur. You know, in concert with the standards for information that have been talked about already, AXIM, FIXIM, WIXIM, right, with those common data standards and the SWIM, that will go a long way towards standardizing all our exchanges. We have a registry, so I've included the link there. When you get the slide, you can just click on that and get to the registry if you're not familiar with what we have. There's actually 100 data products now shared over SWIM by the FAA. There's 60 services. We have over 400 users, so it's been around. Anyone interested in accessing SWIM who doesn't have access to it, there are some links here also you can follow to go learn more about it. And I did want to point out there's sort of two kinds of access. There's something now called the SWIM Cloud Distribution Service, or you'll see SCDS, and that's a more passive, that's just to receive publication type data. Some of our collaborative decision-making activities through, for ATFM, have moved into the SWIM world and are being done that. So those interactive services are accessed a little differently. So there is a contact point if you're not part of the CDM world and would like to find out more or become part of that. And the next slide is just a quick overview of the different kinds of weather products that are there. It is, I realize, it is a little acronym heavy. I would say all the links I provided you on the previous page will give you all the details of what these are, if you want to go follow and pursue those. I will point out a couple of things in there when you see the NESG, that's our security gateway, and some of that infrastructure is really what makes up SWIM. So once we have that infrastructure in place, that becomes common as these different services are added. That's one of the efficiencies you get out of it. So SWIM is kind of that, one of those base services and something that we can add new services to. So when we get to FFICE, that's one of the key things is FFICE. Our intention is to implement that via SWIM. You will access the different services that way. And we have an investment now being worked on to implement the first increment of FFICE, and it's separated into two parts, flight data sharing and the flight planning and filing. So some of the flight data sharing is making sure that we're all in the FFICE formats. A lot of it is already, but it's in an earlier FFICE, so we're going to get aligned with FFICE. And then the flight planning and filing will follow the services that are outlined in SWIM FFICE Release 1. So you would switch to being able to file flight plans in this FFICE format. And we'd also be able to give you that feedback that's been discussed. I think that's all been covered pretty well. And as I mentioned, that's all via SWIM. We plan to incrementally build this up, especially when you look at all the things you hook up among existing systems. It's an interesting challenge to add this in. So chances are we'll be adding features as we go. One of the things we plan is a constant community collaboration to make the decisions on how we go with that. And this will follow what we do in other areas. If anyone's familiar, I'll mention later, the Next Gen Advisory Committee, we have different industry groups that help us in making those kinds of decisions on what will be the best value to go with first. And then shifting from FFICE to TBO, we started here with sort of a generic slide on how the FAA views moving to TBO and what's different about it. And then the red text I put in are some specifics of what we are implementing and planning to implement for that. So the first one is this shift from miles and trail to time-based management. We have some time-based flow management already. TBFM is an existing program in the field, used in a number of places. We're looking at continually enhancing that. Right now, it meters basically in en route, and they want to move some of that time-based methodology more into the terminal area, and then that necessitates two things. Number one, better tools for doing spacing in the terminal area, and also better information to support it, which is where it kind of wraps us back to where we need FFICE. So the better information sharing environment will make the more advanced tools possible. PBN is part of this because the PBN routes, that's part of the more predictability in time, is getting people on the more predictable PBN routes. We have a number in place and are continuing to develop PBN routes, including more RNP routes will be coming. Increased collaboration. We already have a CDM program that a lot of users participate in. FFICE is going to provide an infrastructure that will enhance that in a couple of ways. Number one, just making it more standard so that the interfaces do not need to be unique to us. A lot of our CDM interfaces right now are completely unique to the FAA. So we see it as a positive change if we start all using similar communication mechanisms for this information that you'll be able to use in various places around the world without a big difference. And then also, of course, FFICE is defining new data and we'll have a better and more information available with each other. The next one, I don't have a lot to say about the meaningful success criteria and metrics. Part of this is enhancing our post-op analysis tools. We do a lot with that in terms of developing new routes. I'm not sure how many people are aware of how much the data that comes out of the existing systems is then used to see what's going on and figure out what to do and what to improve. So we see improvements in that area is also meaningful to this whole process. And the organizational support, we have both, I don't know how many people are familiar, we have our air traffic organization, which is responsible for the operation, and then NextGen, which is responsible for this evolution to new capabilities. The two of our organizations have been cooperating heavily on trying to get to this TBO vision. The next slide, so another little bit of TBO in the FAA, sort of a phased view. There was an infrastructure step, which if you look is listed as complete. That included getting SWIM implemented, ADS-B in place, Common Support Services Weather, and something called Aeronautical Common Services, and PBN. So all of those things have been implemented to some degree. Everything will always continue to be improved and incrementally advanced, but all those things have been laid down at some level. Then initial TBO is something that we're working on now, and there are right now some improved tools both on the ATFM side, in surface departure management and in arrival management, and particularly they're targeting our north, what we call the Northeast corridor, the Northeast of the U.S., obviously our busiest airspace and most complex. There's information on all these activities. You see that little arrow at the bottom. I provided another link, and on that web page, there's some information there, but there's also a report there from the Next Gen Advisory Committee, which makes recommendations that are helping shape how we roll this out. The Next Gen Advisory Committee has a lot of our stakeholders represented, both airlines, general aviation, labor groups for pilots and air traffic controllers, aircraft manufacturers, representatives that build ATFM and ATM systems. I think pretty much all the major stakeholders are represented in that committee, and that's one of the major ones that advises us. That's worth checking out if you're not familiar with it. And then in development, this is going to lead to what they would consider full TBO. That will include FFICE, which will, I call it better performance from better data. So a lot of the tools that are envisioned, can't just happen themselves. They need better data in order to really have any meaningful performance improvement, and that's where FFICE is going to come in. And then as the better data is available, we can do continuous improvement and integration of the tools. And a lot of them are the ones I mentioned earlier, spacing tools, time-based flow management, surface and departure management. All those things are what we're looking to improve and get eventually to where we have gate-to-gate management that's integrated. So that's kind of a phased view of how the FAA views moving to TBO. And the last thing I was going to mention, just some of the collaborations we do on SWIM. We are involved in SWIM standards development. We've been doing our own implementation for a long time, but through the information management panel, I don't know why that says plan. There's an IMP and ICAO panel that is developing the SWIM standards, and we're very active in collaborating in that. There's also a SWIM registries collaboration that's joint with European CESAR, and we're working with them on FFICE. Once again, we're on represented in the ATM RPP and active, and working with all our colleagues around the globe on the provisions and guidance for FFICE. And we've been doing a number of demonstrations and workshops with different industry and international partners, which are listed on the last slide. So that's a list of some of the types of activities we've done. I won't read them all to you, but they're there. So if anyone has any questions on any of this or wants to follow up on anything, should feel free to contact me and we'll help you out. And that's all I got.
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yeah, I'm muted.
Okay, thanks, Ray. Next, from DECEA, which is the Department of Airspace Control in Brazil, we have Mrs. Barbara Lins to talk about FFICE. Barbara is an air traffic controller, and she works in the ATM planning and supports Captain Davi, who is the Brazilian member on the ATM RPP, on the implementation of the FFICE concept in Brazil. Over to you, Barbara.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And continue with the webinar series. I'd like to say on behalf of Captain Davi, who unfortunately was unable to participate, Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this initiative. And let us show how Brazil is working the concept of flight and flow information for a collaborative environment, the FFICE. For this, we'll follow a roadmap that aims to present an overview of FFICE Brazil action. So the script will cover the following items: what we have now, how we process, and what we plan. So, about what we have so far. Brazil's representative on the ATM-RP panel is Captain David, as you already know, and he has been giving lectures around the country at seminars and workshops about air navigation. And as a highlight, he did a lecture on the last International Day of Air Traffic Controller, opportunity in which there was the presence of at least one representative of the air traffic specialty for each existing PSNA in Brazil. So it's possible to consider, in terms of dissemination of the concept, that all the control units of the country have at least one human resource aware of the concept. Besides that, Captain David held tabletop exercises in 2018 and 2019, and the product of this exercise were reports produced by the participants with the perception of the concept, with some difficulties that may appear and some suggestions. And as we can see in the second photo, this is the last tabletop exercise applied. It happened here in the SEA in Rio de Janeiro. And in addition, Captain David intends to hold another tabletop with experts from Bolivia, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And how we are processing and conducting the implementation of the concept, we divide in 3 phases, where phase 1, which we are now, corresponds to the study of the manual and its provision for knowledge leveling. The part 2 will be for SWIM Brazil's legislation, and a third phase in which an implementation plan will be defined. And after the definition of the planning action is based on the creation of a work group. That's the next slide. On the creation of a work group chaired by the project manager from FFICE. And
Excuse me, Barbara. Just John here. We're just some of your sound is coming through quite difficult. Can you just check your microphone is not obscured, or just speak closely to the microphone?
Okay, it's better now?
That's much better, thank you.
Okay. Do you want me to repeat, or can I go on?
No, you can continue, please.
Okay. And the definition of the planning action is based on the creation of a work group shared by the project manager of FFICE, and also the creation of subgroups in which we will have specialized technical support. And at this stage, as the SEA is always concerned about applying the concept of CDM in the conduct of its projects, there will certainly be the invitation of the airlines to assist in the conduct of the work. So once we have the action plan, we will insert the project into the strategic program managed by the SEA, Sirius Brazil program, which has as its main focus the use of strategic solutions to assist in the evolution of air traffic management in Brazil. So, as the SEA has one of its governance principles, the delivery of a quality, fast, and reliable information, We believe that FFICE concept will provide the necessary support to achieve this principle in addition to assisting in decision making. Please, the next one. Yes, we are talking about our strategic program, and please can you put the next one? And that's our objective to deliver a quality, fast, and reliable information. And we do believe that FFICE concept will provide the necessary support. So thus, it's expected here that with the FFICE concept, it's the last slide, please. Yes, with the FFI concept combined by SWIM and TBO, we will optimize the flow of information and we will certainly improve the Brazilian air traffic system. And that's for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. We'll move straight on now and we'll hear from Ms. Camilla Bassetto, who is a cartographic engineer working for DECEA since 2005. Camilla is the current Brazilian SWIM project manager and also the Brazilian representative on the information management panel. So we'd like to hear now from Camilla on SWIM in Brazil. Thank you, Camilla.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. How it was said, I'm going to briefly talk to you about the SWIM project here in Brazil. We are going to go through these 3 topics. I'll talk a little bit about the SEA as the SWIM authority. I'll talk a little bit on what we are doing now and point out some next steps. Next, please. So the first one about the SEA. The SEA is the Department of Airspace Control. The SEA is the head of the Brazilian Airspace Control System, what you call CCAB. And we are in charge of the airspace control of this big area you can see there. And we are also in charge of all these topics that are listed in this slide. If you are interested in knowing more about the SEA, I put on some links where you can find some institutional video with English subtitles. Next, please. So, as the SEA has this role to take care of the airspace control here in Brazil, we have established a program for the modernization of the ATM here. Similar to NextGen and CESAR, we have here the Sirius program. And you also can have more information on that on this link above. Next, please. So, putting the SEA on the SWIM architecture. SWIM, as you know, is based on services-oriented architecture, and the SEA is the SWIM authority. So that's why we are taking care in carrying out this project here in Brazil. Next, please. So, and what are we doing on this? We are talking about SWIM since 2013, but we have beginning to act from 2017. And what we first did was to hold some workshops to put out the ATM national community together and talk about this theme. So we have had these 3 workshops, and in the second and in the third one, we carried out 2 demos. Next slide, please. The first demo our goal was to make people understand what SOA was or what SOA is, because we have a public with people from lots of different backgrounds. So what we did was to put on a registry with a service provider, two service providers actually, and to show how a service would be discovered in this scenario. And in the second demo that we carried out this year, in May this year, we did something similar, but in a more practical way. All the details you can find in a paper that we published in an international conference that is available in this link down there. Next, please. Next. Oh, thank you. Well, we understand that for making SWIM real, we need to put together all stakeholders. So in our national environment, we have created a technical committee with the mission to create the first guidelines on the implementation of SWIM in Brazil and an implementation plan. Next, please. And all this technical committee is under the project that is on Sirius program, as I said before. Next slide, please. So just for you to have an idea, we have the participation of a lot of national partners and stakeholders, the government and airlines, Brazilian airlines and Brazilian industry and associations. And these have been very important. This is being very important for us to establish a very collaborative environment from the beginning in this project. Next slide, please. So this committee have worked during last year in some guidelines on SWIM, and now we have published a document on SWIM in Portuguese, and this is a very important target on the project because we have the language barrier. Of course, Portuguese is not an ICAO language, so we have this is a very important point for us. And it's important to point out that this document we have introduced an annex introducing FFICE, because we also don't have yet a document in Portuguese talking about this subject. And so we find out this to be important to be introduced. And in proper time, we are going to do the same to do a whole document on FFICE. Next slide, please. So about next steps, we are today working on an implementation plan, and at the same time as we write a CONOPS on SWIM registry. And we are also investing some efforts in doing research and development together with Academy. So we have some at least 2 or 3 universities here in Brazil that are part of these initiatives with us. Next, please. And I guess it's the last one. So just for you to have an idea on our next goals, we have planned to perform annual demos. So we are trying to make some research and to put this in a more practical way for present for the stakeholders in annual form, so we can keep improving it. we hope to have, we are already working on governance policies, but our plan is to have it all put down on 2021. For 2024, we plan to have a full operational swim registry. And okay, I put on again the swim regional demos. Sorry about that. And we are also already talking about cybersecurity and cyber resilience, but we plan to have a complete set of documents on this by 2023, and to begin swim air ground initiatives from 2025. I also have to say that we have an agreement with Eurocontrol, in which we are already exchanging some data with them and trying to put our services on swim compliant with their policies and governance. So I guess that's it. Next one, I guess yes, that's the last one. I hope you can understand. Next one, please. You have there my contacts as well as my colleague Major Santana, and you are free to reach us if you have any doubts on our project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Camilla. For everyone, we've now heard from three very large service providers on the different developments of SWIM, which I would say 2 years ago was quite a low understood concept, but now you see that there's quite a level of advanced maturity going on globally, which is why it's important that we continue to track lessons learned and continue to do these collaborative trials to make sure we get the best effect out of it all. So I'll jump straight in for a couple of questions. We've probably got about 10 minutes that we can do some questions. Firstly, we did hear from both US FAA and from Eurocontrol on their large programs. How will the coordination over the high seas be aligned with those programs, and how does it fit into the North Atlantic SPG vision for 2030 plan? Kim or Ray would like to offer anything there?
Hi, John. It's Kim here. I think when it comes to what happens over the North Atlantic today, I mean, on our side, where we receive information about flights crossing the North Atlantic, so we receive the messages from Gander, FNM, and MFS messages from Shanwick and Santa Maria and so on. So we're aware of the traffic as it exits the ocean on our side. So there's a level of coordination that takes place there already today. As the question suggests, I'm not aware of any specific sort of FFICE developments taking place in the oceanic areas. But I think, you know, if they do away with the North Atlantic track structure and move towards more of the sort of I suppose you could call it a free route type of environment, that of course lends itself perfectly to trajectory based operations and sharing of trajectory information rather than just the point-to-point messaging and so on. So I think, you know, looking forward, I think the vision is entirely consistent with where we're going in terms of TBO and so on. But I think it's an area where I know in the workshop that we have taking place here in Eurocontrol in a couple of weeks' time, there will be discussion concerning North Atlantic and so on, TBO environment. So certainly it's an ideal sort of proving ground or testing ground, if you like, to be able to implement some of these concepts and test them out simply because of the time that's available with an aircraft crossing the Atlantic and so on. So I think in terms of the vision, it's pretty much aligned with where we want to go. It's just a question of timing and how we implement this.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Thanks, Kim. I'll ask Ray a question too. With the number of connections that we're continuing to set up as we open up SWIM to more and more users, more and more information producers and consumers, how will the security of data and information be defined, and how will that security be guaranteed?
So I'm not going to give you an authoritative answer on that. It is a very hot topic of discussion, I will say that. And there's a lot of aspects of that being looked at, right? Depending on, you know, what we have cases of the simple publication of data and making sure only those authorized to see particular flights see those flights. Some of it is security and some of it is privacy, right? We have privacy laws, and there has to be ways to manage that data as well. If you saw on the diagram, there was this thing called NSCG, is the Security Enterprise Security Gateway, NESG, I'm sorry, is trying to institute a centralized way of doing that. In the past, our data sharing, actually, we've had different programs, and each one has set up their own security. So one advantage we see is to being able to have centralized control over all those aspects. So that's, you know, that's all kind of general. I'm like I said, I'm not the authoritative source on security. All I can say is it's certainly being worked, and those aspects are being worked. I guess SWIM is the place to watch, because that's where all the implementation of those things will occur.
Okay, thank you, Ray. For our colleagues in Brazil, we talked to or heard a lot about the program you're doing there. What's the maturity of a lot of the other stakeholders, in particular your MET provider, your airports to do ACDM, the MET to start generating and sharing in iWixom, not just translated, but from source, from sensors and technology like that?
Well, our domain-specific initiatives, the more mature one is the AIS domain. In the MET domain, we have a few translators by now to move to oh my God, this this is hard for us to say, YXM. But from the originator, from the beginning, not yet. We are still maturing the translators and hoping to have a database able to provide the information in the right format, but not yet from scratch.
Okay, thanks. I think one of the key messages across all the regions and states is the mixed environment and how we manage that. And again, trying not to remain in a mixed environment for too long. We saw that each of the presentations today, each state has a registry in place. There's been a lot of discussion around regional registries or one global registry. The reality is, as each state develops, there'll likely be their own, unless a couple of states get together. Now, I offer this for any of the speakers to answer. How do we get standardization in the registers? I'm going to pick on you, Kim, because I know that that you've got a mature one over there.
Yeah, as you say, we've got a service registry and registers and so on, as I'm sure the FAA do. I think Ray mentioned it, and others. But when your question was to do with standardization in the registries, I'm struggling a little bit to know how exactly that can be how exactly that can be achieved. So yeah, I don't know. The short and honest answer is I don't really know. I mean, I can see that it would be a natural sort of tendency for, and I think there's probably extends beyond just the question of registries, but a natural tendency for things to evolve in a certain way in different states or different regions in terms of implementing FFICE and SWIM and so on, and that there'll be a sort of a coming together, if that's the right word. You know, when lessons have been learned and experience has been gained and so on, then we can. I would imagine that will be the right time to start trying to bring a level of standardization and so on into the. I think it's very difficult up front to say this is the way, this is how all of this sort of standardization and so on, especially at a more technical level, this is exactly how it should be done. Because if we're too prescriptive, you know, we're in danger of sort of shooting ourselves in the foot when it comes to, you know, the developments that are still to take place. I mean, we're only just beginning with FFICE implementation and so on. It's the tip of the iceberg as far as TBO services in general are concerned. So if we're too prescriptive too early, you have the danger of shooting yourself in the foot. So that's a sort of long-winded way of saying I don't know.
Thanks. Going off anything?
I'll add a little bit. I mentioned earlier there is actually a cooperative effort between the U.S. and Eurocontrol and CESAR regarding common registries, and I don't have the up-to-date where they've gotten on that. I have a paper that actually goes back to 2014 where they talked about different concepts they're looking at, including whether to have a centralized or just have sort of coordinated, distributed registries. So I would like to actually find out, you know, we could take that as an action and get back to everybody on what the latest from that group is and what progress they've been made. On the FFI side, we've been talking about, not specifically, not saying the word registry, but the things that, the questions we have for implementation that will lead back to the registry in terms of how are people going to find the services. We're concerned, you know, the standard we always use is today, to send a flight plan, you just need to know a set of AFTN addresses and you pile them in there like an email and send it off. So we, us on the operational side are still trying to understand how we will use SWIM to provide equally seamless service when we start using it for things like flight planning. And that really will lead back to how the registries are set up, how machines can read that stuff. So it's an interesting topic. Yes, neither Kim and I are the experts on it, but I think we can get you probably more information on where that is.
So, Jean-François Groux speaking. What I can tell is that at the IMP, there is ongoing work to define standards to interconnect registries. You know, because having just one centralized registry will never happen. So what we are starting to develop, you know, are standards that will allow interconnection of registries so that users, you know, connect to only one place and have access to all the services published in each of the different service registries.
Okay, thanks, Jean-François. One last question, just to do with the mixed environment of FFICE, with filing services, planning services, etc. ANSPs will have different capabilities, airline planning systems, and as we see, technology is starting to evolve where off-the-shelf systems will have more SWIM capabilities. How are you handling those at the moment with the mixed environment? I'll probably ask you, Kim, given the multiple states in your field.
Okay, well, it's handling a sort of a mixed environment is kind of easy for us because that's pretty much, you know, one of the main reasons why we have an NM in Europe, providing a sort of a centralized, orchestrated sort of an approach, I suppose you could call it, and you know, one of the advantages of having that, you know, that way of working is that we can very relatively easily handle the mixed mode environment in the sense of, you know, we can we receive data in whatever different formats, and we can present the information to the European ANSPs and so on at the, when they want it and in the format that they want it. So it's very much part and parcel of the way in which we've been operating for many years. It gives the European ANSPs, the service providers and so on, the ability to make the migration at a time and that suits them. It's financially very attractive to be able to do that. This is one of the things that happened with the 2012 flight plan implementation was a classic example. So when it comes to mixed mode operation and so on, we have a lot of experience, and we're in a pretty good place, I suppose, when it comes to being able to handle that sort of environment. And in fact, just to give you an example of that, one of the features that's sort of in FFICE, in fact, I just had an email exchange with Ray today on this very subject, was on the ability to translate and forward a flight plan in an what was received as an EFPL, being able to distribute it as an FPL. That capability is sort of recognized within the FFICE implementation guidance and so on. So, and that is something that we, NM will perform that translation and distribution to states within Europe. So in other words, it means an aircraft operator will, at a very early stage, be able to provide EFPLs for flights within Europe and not have to worry about how they have to provide it to the various individual European states. They just provide the EFPL to IFPS, and we'll take care of the rest of it. But it's a functionality that could be extended beyond Europe. I mean, theoretically, if a country outside Europe asked us to do the same thing, we could do that. So I think the handling of mixed mode is certainly something that makes life a lot more complex, but sometimes it's more complex than it really needs to be.
Okay, thanks, Kim. That actually gives me a good segue into the SWIM and ASEAN demo that I mentioned earlier. I'd got it mixed up. It's actually a presentation at our next webinar for Asia Pacific later this evening. If anyone wants to hear that, it's just to click onto that meeting. But that demo did demonstrate the translating capability for both airspace users and ANSPs and airports to become a certain level of SWIM capability by going through a third-party translator, which accelerates the capability and the development in these concepts and the implementation, which is important. So I think that's all we have time for as far as the questions go. If people need more information, you've seen in all four presentations, there are links to information in those areas. ICAO has information videos, and IATA has information videos as well. You just need to go to the sites. There are training courses being offered globally to introduce you to SWIM. IATA does that as well as other organisations. Anyone wants any information on any of those from IATA or ICAO, or as I said, from the links today, please do. But thank you to the speakers today, and thank you to everyone for participating, and I'll hand back to Tomo to conclude.